Hello everyone! I recently got my best win streak ever in Go Battle League by winning 19 straight in Open Great League, and I did not record the first 3 battles, but I will show you the last 16 games of the streak and also the game that I lost at the end of it. And I don't want my videos to be too long, so I will split it into 2 videos, and this is the first part where I have some introduction and explanation of the team and 7 battles, as you can see here to the right with the timestamps, and then I will show you the last 10 battles in a second part. So first, some backstory. I wanted to make an XL-bastiodon specifically to have a better matchup against Pelipper and Alolan Marowak so that it survives 3 weather balls or 3 bone clubs, which the bastiodon I had at the time didn't do. And also I wanted to speedrun 1000 elo to legend with XL-bastiodon, so I was playing for fun and with a lot of bad teams and auto-rect to tank my rating below 2000, and then when my XL-bastiodon was done I best buddied it and started the run at 1901 elo. On the first day I went 26-4 with 1 save set from the day before, and then 23-2 on the second day, gaining a total of 614 elo in just 2 days, including this 19 game win streak from roughly 2200 to 2400 elo. But I have yet to hit legend, so the speedrun part of this challenge was a failure. Moving on to the team, you've probably seen this before because it's pretty popular now and I have made a video about it before, and even though I've played double steel since way before ABB lines were a thing, I have not been using Venusaur as a lead in this line until just a few months ago, and this team was already a thing back then, so I cannot claim this particular team as my own. But anyways, the strategy is to bait out water types and fighters with Galarian Stunfisk and then sweep with Bastiodon when their best steel counter is gone. So it's pretty standard, and what's not standard is that both Venusaur and Galarian Stunfisk are purposely slightly attack weighted. I would say that the most important CMP to win in the entire game is in the Galarian Stunfisk mirror, since whoever connects with the first Earthquake is in a much better position, and also by having some extra attack on gfisk, unless the opponent also have some attack weighted Pokemon, you will win CMPs against Altaria and Hypno and Defense Deoxys and Dugong and Tropius, and sometimes even against Skarmory and Lapras if they have really low attack. And on top of that, of course, your charge moves deal some extra damage, so my Galarian Stunfisk actually needs 4 fewer mud shots to defeat an Azumarill, which really helps to get switch advantage when your opponent counter switches into Azumarill when I switch in Galarian Stunfisk. So all in all, I would totally recommend to have a slightly attack weighted Galarian Stunfisk. Moving on, my Venusaur is also attack weighted, and this is not as important as gfisk, but I also find that the CMP in this mirror is beneficial to win, and it also has a fast move breakpoint against Bastiodon so that it wins in the 1 shield scenario, and on top of that you can also win the CMP against Frostlass and Swampert and Sableye, which might be useful sometimes, but as I said, this is not even close to as impactful as having an attack weighted Galarian Stunfisk. Lastly, the star of the show is XL-bastiodon, and when building one of these, I believe that the most important aspect is to have as much HP as possible, because the defense is already so high, so it won't matter in most cases. And mine is HP weighted and has 139 HP, where my previous Bastiodon had 132. So on top of just having a better total damage output, this XL-bastiodon can now easily tank 3 weather balls plus all the wing attacks from Pelipper and farm down all the way in the 0 shields using only Smackdown, which is amazing since Pelipper is such a common safe swap at the moment. And also, this Bastiodon can farm down a good IV Alolan Marowak using no shields if I get all the piggybacks. And anyways, this is to give some insight on the team and why I have the IVs that I have, so now I will show you battles number 4 to 10 in my best GBL win streak to date. So first up is a game against Bleezy Izzy, and he leads with a Drifblim, and this is game number 4 of the win streak, because as I mentioned I didn't record the first 3. But Drifblim is a complete wall to Venusaur, so I switch into Galarian Stunfisk and he counter switches into Scrafty. So this is how a lot of the games play out, that I'm completely hard countered, but I have trust in Bastiodon in the end, because now the fighter is gone, and for some reason he undercharged these power-up punches, so I'm able to reach 2 charge moves, and he's going to even use a shield here, which he didn't need to, but I guess my opponent wanted to reach another charge move against Venusaur, because the Venusaur is hard countered by Drifblim. So I'm thinking that Venusaur is not worth much here, So I'm gonna let this go and hopefully be able to farm down, but I'm actually not, since the Scrafty is double buffed with power-up punches. So now I have Bastiodon against Drift Beam and something else in the back, and I have a shield advantage. So my opponent throws after 4 hexes, so I know that is for sure an Icy Wind. And then my opponent tries to farm up to a Shadow Ball, but it doesn't work because I go straight for the Stone Edge. And then my opponent's last Pokemon is Meganium. So here my opponent throws immediately, which I know for sure this is a Frenzy Plant, so I'm gonna let it go because I will easily be able to tank one of them. And then I will go straight Flamethrowers, and my opponent is forced to shield, and even though I'm debuffed, Bastiodon will be able to take the 1 shield, or I mean the 2 shield against Meganium. So here in this matchup, I really didn't need to have an XL Bastiodon, even though I go down fairly low. A regular Bastiodon would still be able to win in that situation. So my second opponent is Ometag 5, and he leads with a Shadow Victreebel, which is an absolutely amazing lead for this team, because I will be able to force some shields and I double resist the Razor Leafs. So I overcharge his first Sludge Bomb slightly if my opponent tries to catch it on something, but then I go straight for the second one to hopefully outpace it. But I have to shield this, because if my opponent is also running Sludge Bomb and I don't shield it, then it's pretty much an auto loss. Just to be safe, I shielded it and forced my opponent's second shield, and then my opponent counter switches a Shadow Machamp onto Galarian Stunfisk, and an unshielded Shadow Machamp is a dead Machamp. So here I'm in an amazing spot. I will be able to reach a Rock Slide against the Shadow Victreebel and take it out, and my opponent's last Pokemon is Azumarill, which would have been a much better counter switch to my Galarian Stunfisk, because it's much better than Shadow Machamp in the Zero Shields. And I didn't even bother to go for a Rock Slide onto the Azumarill, because I want to save some time and go just for the Frenzy Plant with Venusaur. And it seems like my opponent is connected, but this was a lost game either way. So GG. Moving on to the next game, I faced Taijo Haru, and he leads with a Jellicent, which is great because Venusaur can easily handle it, and my opponent switches into Skarmory. So what I like to do here is charge up to a Frenzy Plant before switching out, because now I have a Frenzy Plant ready that I can use at any point later in the game when my switch timer is up. So I'm much more prepared for an eventual fighter. And my opponent goes to throw all of these Sky attacks, and this is to stall out the timer, so I'm expecting the switch, because if he didn't want to stall out the timer and switch so that his Skarmory can beat Venusaur later, he would have thrown the Brave Bird instead. So as soon as I see the switch into a Medicham, I throw my Flamethrower, because this Medicham is the last hope my opponent has to win the game, because the Jellicent is no threat to my backline. And when my opponent did not shield that Frenzy Plant, it is basically over. But my opponent does not know that, but I expect him to resign later when he sees my Galarian Stunfisk. So here, the Skarmory is actually so low that I will be able to force a shield, and then my opponent throws a Sky attack, and I'm not going to shield this, because I want some extra farm on Bastiodon. And here we will just trade some charge moves. I go for the Stone Edge, my opponent goes for the Bubble Beam, and then I will switch out to Galarian Stunfisk, and hopefully my opponent resigns to save some time when he sees it. So he goes for a bait, and then he resigns, thankfully. Moving on to the next game against Michi Rugv, and he leads with a Melmetal. So this is a tricky lead, because the superpower will deal a ton of damage to my backline, and Melmetal resists all of Venusaur's moves. So I will actually just overcharge a ton of energy and basically store it in case my opponent has a fighting type in the back. But my opponent stays in with his Melmetal against my Galarian Stunfisk, so that's great. I will be able to force a shield, and now that the Melmetal is debuffed from the first superpower, these second and third are not going to deal much damage, so I'm actually going to let it go through. and then my opponent switches into a Mandibuzz, which is absolutely amazing, because if that is their best answer to Galarian Stunfisk, then Bastiodon is going to have a fun time against this team. So I charged up to an Earthquake, and then switched out. So I still don't know what my opponent's last Pokemon is, but I have basically 2 Frenzy Plants and an Earthquake loaded, which both, any of those charge moves is gonna be able to deal with the Melmetal, and then there are very few Pokemon that can survive Bastiodon with energy and 2 Frenzy Plants and Earthquake. So here I'm going to shield this. My opponent is out of energy, so even if he shields this next charge move, I would be able to reach a Flamethrower. But my opponent's last Pokemon is Hypno, so now this is completely over. My opponent could resign, but he doesn't, and I don't know what he does. But I go for a second Stone Edge and then immediately switch into Venusaur and KO this Hypno with a Frenzy Plant. The last game of the set, and game number 8 of the win streak, is against Pikenk, and he leads with a Deoxys defense form, which is a very interesting lead, because every single Deoxys in the lead has Psycho Boost. So the way most players play it is that they charge up to 2 Psycho Boost, so at 10 counters I will switch out and then catch this Psycho Boost on my Galarian Stunfisk, and my opponent counter switches into Swampert. So, well, this is a bad matchup, but I'm in a good spot, because now their water type is gone, so Bastiodon does not have to face it, and Venusaur is still healthy, so in case of something that destroys Bastiodon, then Venusaur could still probably be able to handle it. So my opponent comes back in with Deoxys defense form and throw the Psycho Boost, so now they are empty on energy, so I will charge up another 5 Vine Whips before I try to catch the next Psycho Boost, but my opponent anticipated it and did not throw immediately, so now my opponent has a charge move ready in the back, which I need to be aware of, and this Shiftry is actually has a kind of good matchup against the Bastiodon, especially because it will be able to shield all of these Flamethrowers. So I'm forced to shield this, or at least 1 Leaf Blade. I could tank 1 more, but he's going to reach 1 more before I get to Flamethrower. So now the Shifter is out of energy, so I will throw this Flamethrower, force his last shield, and then immediately switch into Venusaur and throw my Frenzy Plant, because I would have lost CMP if I let the Shifter farm down my Bastiodon, and then since I doubled up on my Frenzy Plant, I can win the CMP against Defense Deoxys and win the game. So that was a very close game, but thanks to all of that saved energy on Venusaur, I could win. Moving into the next set, and the first game there is against Julitro Fresco in game number 9 of the win streak, and he leads with an Alolan Marowak, which is terrible for Venusaur, so I immediately switch into my Galarian Stunfisk, and this is a fairly neutral matchup, but I hope that my opponent switches so that I can have my Bastiodon against the Alolan Marowak later in the game, and he switches into a Meganium. So this is great for me because I have a ton of energy, and I just need to connect with 3 Rock Slides to take switch advantage, so that my Venusaur does not have to face the Alolan Marowak. So I'm definitely going to start shield here. If my opponent takes it to the 2 shield and both of us use both of our shields, then he will maintain switch advantage. But if my opponent does not want to do that, then I'm in a much better position. So here I hope that my opponent does not shield, and they actually don't. So now my Venusaur will be up against his Azumarill, and my Bastiodon is up against his Alolan Marowak. So that's kind of weird that he did not want to have switch advantage, but I guess he thought that Ice Beams from Azumarill could deal with Venusaur. So here I immediately switch into Bastiodon as soon as I see that he switches, and I did not get the piggyback, so at this point I know that I'm not going to be able to farm down all the way with only fast moves, so I'm actually forced to throw a Stone Edge, and my opponent shields this. So this is great, because now the Azumarill in the back is much more vulnerable, and since I'm XL, I will be able to tank this and deal 2 more smackdowns. So in that game, XL was crucial to have on Bastiodon. A regular Bastiodon would have lost me the game there, but I was able to outpace that Azumarill to a Frenzy Plant. And now it's the last game of this video against Apetsu, and he leads with Driftblim, but the last 10 games of the win streak will be in my next video. I switch into Galarian Stunfisk of course, and my opponent counter switches into Obstagoon, so I lured out the pseudo fighter. And here I go for the Earthquake to deal some damage, and since this connects, it is actually in farm down range for Vine Whips. So even though I got completely hard counter in the lead and in the switch-in, I'm going to have my full health 2-shielded Bastiodon against his last 2 Pokemon, where the fighter is gone, and I also have almost 2 Frenzy Plants loaded on my Venusaur. So here my opponent has an Alolan Ninetales, and well, they realize immediately there's no way to win the game. So that's it for this video. Stay tuned for part 2 of this win streak. Thanks for watching.